All right, we're looking at Unit 2, Lesson 2. So, talking about domain and range. And when we're talking about domain and range, domain is all of the possible x values, or we could say all the possible inputs. So, however we think of that, x values or inputs, both mean the same thing. It's the number that's being put into the function. Then range is the set of all possible y values or the outputs. So what that means is, whatever the function is, if I put in a -6 here, so if I put in a -6 here for x, it should always give me a 0 for y. That's the input and output. Now when we're listing these, we're going to bracket them together. And to list the domain, for this one we're just going to list all of the x values that I have here. So -6, -1, 0, 4. And I've got a -1 twice, but I'm only going to put it once on here. Then for the range, I'm going to do the same thing with all the y values. So in brackets, 0, 2, 6, 9, and 15. And so functions we can have either discrete or continuous. For our graphs, if it's discrete, it's going to be unconnected. So discrete is going to be unconnected points, which would be like this right there. Continuous graphs are lines or curves. So right there. So we have a definite difference between the two. If I look at the two of them, we're actually going to list the domain and range in two different ways. So for my discrete, like this one here, listing the domain is just going to be listing the x values of the different points. So I can look up and down and see, just as I go along, -5, -4, -1, 0, 1, 3, 5. Those are my points. So that would be my full domain there. Then for my range, do the same thing with the y values, starting at -4 and kind of going up from there. So -4, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, and 5. Now for our continuous that we've got over here, we're going to do it a little different, because even though I could list, okay, there's -4, -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, it's got an arrow, that means it's going to keep on going. But also, since it's a line, there's a point at -3.5 or -3.25 or 0.0001. So there's no way for me to list all of those all together. And so as we write the domain, we'll put it as my x values. So if I look, it starts on the left side at -4. So we'll start at -4. Then we have all the x values that we've got, and it's going to go all the way up to infinity. So then all we have to figure out is the sign that we put in the middle here. So when we look at -4 here, this point, if it's closed in, that's going to tell us the closed in dot is less than or equal to. If we have an open dot, it's just going to be less than. So on our dots, if it's colored in, then you've got the line underneath. If it's not colored in, you don't have the line underneath. So for this, it's colored in, which means I'm going to have the line underneath. And for my arrow up top here, if I get an arrow, we're just going to do that as less than. And so writing it in this way right here is going to always, we can kind of always use less than, so either less than or equal to or less than for our points. Then for range, we're going to go low to high. So we're going to start at the lowest point here, which is at a +2. So start at a 2, then I have all my y values, and I hit an arrow up here. So when I hit an arrow, that means we're going all the way to infinity. Okay, and so since we're going all the way to infinity, if we look, since I've got a closed dot there, that means I'm going to do less than or equal to. And up here, when I've got an arrow, I'm just going to do less than. So just like that, we've got our domain and range written there. We're also going to run into some where you have dots on both ends. So when I do that, when I'm looking for a domain, and for these, it helps sometimes if I label the point. So this is -3, 9, and this is 2, 4. Remember when we write it, x values always come before the y values. So let's look at our x values first. I've got a -3, then all my x's in the middle, and then a 2. That's just looking at my x values that I have there. Then when I look, I'll look at closed or open dots. So up here we said closed is less than or equal to, open is just less than. So looking at this one, I have an open dot at -3, so I'll do that as less than. Closed dot at 2, so that's going to be less than or equal to. Now for my range, I'm going to look at the y values. And so remember, on my range, I'm going from low to high. So the lowest point that I have is actually not on either one of those 2 points. It's actually down here at the bottom. So that is another important point we can't forget, which would be the point 0, 0. So if we look down here, I've got that point. My y values go from here 0, and I probably should have put that at the start, but it goes from down here at 0 all the way up to 9. So we move from 0 all the way up to 9. And anytime I have a curve, it's going to actually touch that point. So think of that as a closed dot. We'll do less than or equal to. 9 up here doesn't have a closed dot, it's open, so we'll do it just as less than. Okay, then we have one where we end up with arrows on both sides. So going from left to right, it doesn't stop anywhere. When that happens, I can write this one in 2 ways. I can either write it as going from -infinity all the way up to +infinity, or quicker, easier way to write it is to say all real numbers, which is just like an R with 2 lines through it. And so that's actually the same on the range. I hit arrows going up and down, So we'd say the range is all real numbers as well. And let's look at one more example here with the time we've got. I've got, let's see, it's a curve, so that means it's going to be continuous. So if there's any lines of any kind, we'll say it's continuous. And then looking at my domain. So on my domain, I have, when I try to find the end of it, so I'm working back and forth here, and on the end I have an arrow. So since I have an arrow going left, that's going to go from negative infinity, and since I have an arrow on the right, it'll go to positive infinity. So my domain is actually all real numbers here. And my range, if I look, now we're going from top to bottom, so going up I have arrows that I hit, but on the bottom I have this point right here. So 0, -4 is actually an important point that we have, and what that means is my range goes from, and remember we're doing low to high, so -4, and then it doesn't stop, it goes all the way up to infinity. And anytime I've got infinity, I'll just do less than. And anytime I have a curve, I'll do less than or equal to. So, on labeling our domain and range, those are kind of a good idea of the different things you would see. Labeling all of our important points, high point, low point, farthest to the left, farthest to the right, is going to help you to label those accurately as we go along and work on finding domain and range.